to my channel French Pulse. Let's enjoy learning French. Today we're going to learn about personal pronouns, and in this part we're going to learn about the placement of personal pronouns. Now we're going to learn about the placement of le pronom object direct, indirect, pronom I and en. Where will they be placed? Now they will be placed before the verb in simple tenses. What are the simple tenses? The simple tenses will be present tense, futur simple, l'imparfait, conditionnel présent, and also before imperative negative. They will also be placed before the infinitive in futur proche, passé récent, and when there are two verbs side by side where the second verb is in infinitive. What do we mean by infinitive? Which means non-conjugated form. These pronouns will be placed after the verb in l'imperative, affirmative, and also after the reflexive pronoun in reflexive verbs. Let's go through some examples to understand these placements. Let's see the placement of pronouns in simple tenses. Now, in simple tenses, pronouns are placed before the verb in all three forms. What do we mean by the three forms? The three forms are affirmative, negative, and interrogative form. Now, let's look at an example with affirmative. Le garçon fait, it could be le travail, it could be son travail, or it could be ce travail. So here we replace the subject pronoun also. It's le garçon, so il, and le travail, if it is le travail, or if it is son travail or ce travail, is replaced by le. So where am I supposed to place it? I'm supposed to place it before the verb. So here we go. In a affirmative sentence, we can see that le garçon fait le travail, le garçon fait son travail, le garçon fait ce travail is replaced by il le fait. Now, let's look at a negative sentence. Il n'aime pas l'image. I'm supposed to replace this. So, il ne, and place it before the verb, il ne l'aime pas. So, whether it is affirmative or whether it is negative, what we have learned is that we have to place the pronoun before the verb. Now, let's see the case with interrogative sentence. Aime-t-il l'image? Even here, l'image has to be replaced and we have to place it before the verb even in an interrogative sentence. L'aime-t-il is how we have to write it. So from this we have learned when it's in simple tenses, pronouns are placed before the verb in all three forms, and we saw examples. What are the three forms? Affirmative, negative, and interrogative. In the previous examples, we saw how to place the direct object before the verb in all three forms, that is affirmative, negative, and interrogative. Now, we are going to see some more examples where we place the indirect object pronoun before the verb in affirmative, negative, as well as interrogative. So here we've got l'enfant parle à son père. Here we can see that the verb has got a preposition here. So this is going to be indirect object. So l'enfant will be replaced by il, and this is the subject pronoun, and we write parle. And what will à son père be replaced with? It will be replaced with Louis. So it has to be placed before the verb. Il, Louis, parle. Now let's look at a negative sentence. L'enfant ne parle pas à son ami. Again, we've got a subject pronoun. Then we've got negative sentence and it's followed by preposition plus a person and it's going to be replaced by lui. Where am I supposed to place it? Let's first write il. The subject pronoun will be replaced by il, ne, and then lui parle pas. So here we can see that even in such case, in the negative sentence, we are placing the indirect object before the verb. Now, let's look at an example with an interrogative sentence. Montrez-vous la photo à l'enfant? Now, we are going to replace only the indirect object because there is a preposition plus a person. And where am I going to place it? So, we have to place it before the verb. So, it will be replaced by lui, montrez-vous. And we are not replacing la photo for the timing. When we learn it properly, then we are going to write that. So here we can see that we have placed this before the verb in an interrogative sentence. So in these few examples we have seen, whether it's a direct object or whether it's an indirect object, in all simple tenses, they will be placed before the verb in all three forms of affirmative, negative and interrogative. Let's continue learning the placement of pronouns. Let's learn the placement of pronouns when there are two verbs. Pronouns are placed before the infinitive in all three forms. What do we mean by infinitive? It means unconjugated form. So here we've got, let's look at an example in an affirmative sentence. Tu veux parler à ton directeur? We can see after the verb it's followed by preposition plus a person. So this is indirect object. And where am I supposed to place it? We are supposed to place it before the unconjugated form of the verb, that is infinitive. So here we go. We place the indirect object pronoun before infinitive. Let's look at an example of a negative sentence. Elle ne veut pas acheter le gâteau. So here we've got acheter, the verb is directly followed by the object. There's no preposition, so this is going to be replaced by a direct object. So, elle ne veut pas, and then we place the direct object in front of the infinitive. Because of the clash of vowel, we write it as L apostrophe. So we can see it's placed before the infinitive, even in a negative sentence. Now let's take an example of an interrogative sentence. Aimeriez-vous parler à votre directeur? So here we've got a preposition followed by a person, so it will be replaced by lui. So we have two verbs, it has to be placed before infinitive. So we write out our sentence, aimeriez-vous, and then lui parler. So here we've got the indirect object placed before the infinitive. Let's continue learning placement of pronouns with more examples. Let's look at the placement of pronouns in imperative. Now, in imperative affirmative form, the pronouns are placed after the verb. So here we've got acheter, it could be ces romans, it could be les romans. So whatever it is, it will be replaced. This is a direct object. It would be replaced by les. So we write the verb in infinitive, put a hyphen and put les. So acheter les. Now let's look at another example of an affirmative sentence. Expliquez au patron, or expliquez à la fille, or expliquez à l'enfant. In all these cases, It's preposition plus person, so it will be replaced by indirect object pronoun, and here it is all singular, so Louis. So we write out the verb in imperative, expliquer, put a hyphen and put Louis. So we can see that in imperative affirmative, the pronoun is placed after the verb. Now, in negative form, the pronouns are placed before the verb. So let's take an example. Ne parlez pas aux enfants. Now we can see the verb has got a preposition followed by a person, and this is in plural form, so it's going to be replaced by leur. Now, as we know, we have to place it before the verb in imperative negative. So ne leur parlez pas. So here we can see that the pronoun is placed before the verb. Now let's continue learning with some more examples, the placement of pronouns. Let's learn the placement of pronouns in passé composé. So in passé composé, the pronoun is placed before the auxiliary verb. But we have to be careful. When it's a direct object pronoun, we have to be very careful. The past participle agrees with the direct object pronoun in number and gender. So let's look at an example. Il a lu le roman. Now this is a direct object, we know, because it's directly followed after the verb. And les romans will be replaced by les. Where am I supposed to place it? Before the auxiliary verb, but because this is a direct object, there's going to be a direct object agreement. Now, roman is masculine and plural, so I need to add an S here. Il les a lus. Now, let's look at another example to understand this better. Elle a acheté les robes. Now, we can see here, this is also a direct object because it's immediately after. The object is immediately after the verb. Les robes will be replaced by les. Now, where am I supposed to place it? I'm supposed to place it before the auxiliary. So I write les before the auxiliary verb, but you have to be very careful. Le robe is feminine and plural. So add an E for feminine and add an S for the plural. So, elle les a achetés. However, passé composé can also be formed with the auxiliary être. In such a case, passé composé with verb être agrees with the subject. Now, let's look at an example. Hier, les filles sont arrivées. Filles is feminine and plural. Therefore, I need to add an E and an S. So, les filles sont arrivées tard. Now let's continue learning the placement of pronouns with some more examples. Let's look at the placement of pronouns in passé composé. In passé composé, the pronoun is placed before the auxiliary verb. Now we have to be very careful when it's a direct object pronoun. The past participle agrees with the direct object pronoun in number and in gender. Let's look at a few examples to understand this better. Il a lu le roman. So we can see this is a direct object because it's immediately after the verb. And I'm supposed to place it before the auxiliary verb. So it's plural. Therefore I write il les a lu. But as we said just now, there has to be a direct object agreement. Roman is masculine and plural, so we add an S. So il les a lus. Let's look at the second example. Elle a acheté les robes. Again, we can see the direct object immediately after the verb, and this is going to be replaced by les. It's feminine and plural. Where am I supposed to place it? Before auxiliary verb. Elle les a achetés. But robe is feminine and plural. So for feminine I add an E, and for plural I add an S. Now, let's look at a negative sentence and see. Elle n'a pas lu cette histoire. So here I can see this is also a direct object because it's followed immediately after the verb. This is feminine and singular. It's going to be replaced by la. But here, because of clash of vowel, I need to put an L apostrophe. Elle ne l'a pas lu. Now, we have a direct object agreement. Histoire is feminine and singular, so we need to add an E. And let's look at an example with an interrogative sentence. Avez-vous lu cette histoire? Again, this is the direct object. It needs to be replaced by la. It's immediately after the verb, so it's a direct object. And where am I supposed to place it? I'm supposed to place it in front of the auxiliary verb. So here, l'avez-vous lu? And histoire is feminine and singular, so we add an E here. So in all three forms, we have seen the position, and this is very important. This is called direct object pronoun. Let's continue learning the placement of pronouns with more examples. Let's continue with the placement of pronouns in passé composé. In passé composé, we saw that pronoun is placed before the auxiliary verb. Now, something that is very important, passé composé with auxiliary être agrees with the subject. So let's take an example. Hier, les filles sont venues tard. Now here my subject is les filles, which is feminine and plural, so we have to add es. So when we have auxiliary être, then it agrees with the subject. Now, next we go on to when it's an indirect object pronoun. It's very important. There's no agreement with indirect object pronoun. So let's take an example. Elle a parlé à son frère. I can see here the verb and then it's followed by preposition plus a person. So this will be replaced by Louis. Elle a parlé à son frère. Elle lui a parlé. We are not going to have any agreement with indirect object pronouns. Let's take an example of the same sentence in negative. Elle n'a pas parlé à son frère. Elle ne lui a pas parlé. So we can see here it's placed before auxiliary, here also before the auxiliary. And let's look at the same example in interrogative form. A-t-elle parlé à son frère? So this is an indirect object pronoun which is placed after with preposition plus person, and it will be replaced by Louis, and it's going to be placed here. Louis a-t-elle parlé? I hope you have understood the placement of pronouns in French. Do click to the link to do more exercises on the same. Au revoir, à bientôt.